and have an interesting conversation about the future of how software is being developed right now. So, um, does somebody want to kick it off? Colleen, let's say hi to you. How are you, Colleen? Maybe she's not able to come off mute.
She might be rugging a little bit. She
Yep.
might have to leave this space and come back.
Yeah, and I fully expect to take a moment for this thing to kind of get kicked off and for the algorithm to pick it up and start moving it around. So, um, Tolly, do you want to? Well, let me introduce myself. I'll start with introducing myself real quick, and then I'll hand it off to Tolly. Tolly, we can just go over to Heap Wolf from there, and then we'll play hot potato. If anybody else wants to jump up again, you can request to speak. My name's Ryan Martirado. I am the CMO at DXOS. I am a web tinkerer for the last decade, building things like websites and most recently lots of stuff in the Webflow world in the no code space, and now with AI and working with DXOS. It's very interesting building some decentralized and local first software. That's super exciting to me fundamentally, and I'm sure we'll get into why that's important at some level at some level of this conversation. But I'm just interested in connecting and talking with interesting folks who are building stuff on the front edge of the internet. And I think that's mostly what we have here. So, Totally, I'm going to bounce it over to you. Maybe just intro yourself a little bit here. If everybody could do us a favor and share the space or leave a little chat, a little comment in it. Let's see if we can get the algorithm picking this up. Otherwise, yeah, totally, we'll kick it around to you. Let's get a quick intro from everyone, and then I've got just a few prompts to guide the conversation.
For sure, bro. Thanks for having me up. I'm Tolly. I'm a co-founder of a platform called Drip. It's virtual economy infrastructure and a Web3 digital collectibles a project called Bearish. And in Bearish, one of our pillars is we do these hackathons, these sprints specifically focused on vibe coders. People that have never written a single line of code, that don't know CSS, et cetera, but they can use AI, natural language to build stuff. We had our first little test flight sprint about 2 weeks ago, and we had just over 50 builders, most of them completely brand new to coding, build 46 different apps and games. And many of them were really, really high quality, really fun games. Really interesting apps, right? Just using, over the course of, I think it was like 3 days, we held some workshops between using Cursor, V0. Rymar actually came on to talk about Replit. And by the end of the week, to see the sheer amount of submissions and the quality of it completely blew me away, right? And so, like it's a big thing that we do there. And I myself have been vibe coding, I think, for maybe the last 6, 8 months or so. I've built some cool stuff. We can jump into that, but yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting to see how fast some of this stuff's happening. You and I totally have been tinkering with products and different stuff for a while now, and just seeing how fast things are moving and what people are able to build. Um, Let me introduce Lou. Lou is a super talented dev here locally, also, who I've kind of been riffing back and forth with. He consults software companies, and they just you work with a lot of different folks in different technical capacities, and you've kind of dealt a lot with the vibe coding stuff. I guess my initial thought for folks as they're opening is just what are your initial thoughts here as this evolves, right? It's everything's moving so fast. The tooling is kind of evolving so quickly. So maybe just as you introduce yourself, share a little bit of those opening thoughts, and yeah, what's got you kind of intrigued about the whole
Sure.
idea?
So
Yep.
uh, I'm an independent software developer. I've been a software engineer and in the product engineering space for over 30 years, doing typical, let's call it typical software development, just coding normal as you would have, whatever, 5 years ago. And but for the past more than a year, close to 2 years, I've been using Copilot for AI assisted coding, and now I'm using Cursor for more prompt based coding. I'm staying away from calling it vibe coding because what I think I'm doing is not that different from what I was doing before. It's just greatly assisted by the AI and prompting. I guess I would say the main difference is that I review all the code that's being generated before accepting it into my repository. That would probably be the main difference between what I'm doing in vibe coding. But I am very interested in the what people are doing who don't have the ability to do that, but are able to make compelling, very complex, very customized software with just prompting and without reviewing or understanding the code. And I've been looking at what you've been making, Raimar, and then I've been working with a couple of other people, seeing what they're making. And my clients typically are software developers and doing what I'm doing, but and everything in between. I'm all for it, all the various ways of doing it, and I'm here just to see more, learn more about what other people are doing.
Nice. Okay, let's kick it over to Paulo. Paulo's another very competent technical thinker and product builder, so I'll be interested to see. I think you and Lou are probably our more technical folks here, just from a developer standpoint, and then the rest of us are mostly in the vibe. So yeah, happy to hear your thoughts.
Oh yeah. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Check. Okay, cool. Let's keep it in the vibes. I have been working on some very, very, very deep technical problems for the last like 10 years, like peer-to-peer networking stuff and hacking on browsers and doing, just like a lot of different kinds of things. And the product that I work on, really ended up having a significant AI component in it. And so I spent a lot of time with AI stuff. And um, at this point, it's really clear that it's changing a lot of things for a lot of people. And there's some really interesting consequences that kind of come out of that second order, third order effects. And it'd be really interesting to kind of chat about some of that stuff, what it is. And, when there's an entirely, new kind of generation of people entering the software development industry and being empowered to create things in an entirely new way. I mean, it's super exciting, but there's definitely some interesting things that fall out of that, and that would be really cool to talk about here. Um, and and maybe even some of the stuff I'm working on.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we want to get into is what folks are tinkering with, what they're running into, what the hurdles are, what some of the complications are. There's been stories about people exposing API keys and having projects wrecked. And, then there's stories about people being super productive and launching, cool little things. And, like I'm building all sorts of little trinkets and things. I mean, I found myself more sleepless nights tinkering with Vibe code than I have in all of my years as a maker. And I've had plenty of sleepless nights learning, first WordPress back in like 2012 and then Webflow in 2017. And now, like AI, like the no code stuff between the 2017 till now. And now this AI vibe stuff is just a whole nother layer onto that. So let's introduce the last two folks who haven't said anything. We've got Colleen. Hello. Longtime sidekick. Excited to have you up on stage. And then Daniel, we'll kick it to you right after that. So Colleen, tell us a little bit about what you're tinkering on and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm just playing around with different tools, and right now my first love is Windsurf, but I like some of the things that came out of Google last week, and nothing commercial at the moment. For me, I feel like there's a huge, I'm needing to kind of undergo a huge like thought process or change process in terms of how I think and interact with these tools. I don't know if anybody else is encountering that at all. And just have moments where I just feel like I'm in a flow state. I guess that's one of the reasons why maybe vibe coding is a good term in some ways. I think it's a bad term in others, but I'm just having a lot of fun being able to experiment and create things that help me do things in ways that there's no commercial software out there right now to handle some of those things. So I'm excited about kind of that personal type of things, and then also how that's going to potentially empower and what products are we going to see in the next couple of years of people who previously had no thought of being able to do something, but are able to use these tools to create great products and services. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you've been tinkering in the no code space for a long time. One of the things I'll want to talk a little bit about is, there's the vibe code, there's folks that are kind of throwing it out the door and saying, oh, well, I can't get anything done. The AI is dumb. And then there's folks like us who maybe have a little bit of technical experience who can guide it a little better and maybe get better results. And so there's definitely a spectrum of potential here, which is only going to continue to get better. But yeah, go ahead.
There is, and I think I think one thing that people that are really discounting a lot of this are not realizing is how fast it's changing, and they keep moving the goalposts. And so I think they're going to get caught unawares and in a bad state.
Yeah, right. Writing it off and then not coming back like a month later, you mean, or something like that, and seeing how much it's gotten better.
Yeah. And being open to that. Yeah. There's a lot that it doesn't do, or it doesn't do well right now, but the capabilities, it's only going to get better. I mean, it is getting better each week.
Yeah.
So.
All right, let's introduce the last, but definitely not least of the speakers right now. And again, if anybody wants to jump in, the speaker, you can feel free to request. But Daniel, I know you've been tinkering with, specifically in the video space, a little bit with generative video, turning photos into videos, real estate videos, and also we're playing with music in the AI space a little bit. And you've just been building for a while, so yeah, give us your thoughts and give us a quick little introduction.
Yeah, first shout out Ramar and Colleen. You guys were kind of like the introduction that I had to Webflow many years ago, and been keeping up and seeing all the different new tools and platforms that have come out ever since. As designers, and it kind of reminds me of the whole no code, low code kind of theory, but now it's kind of moved into other mediums in video and images. And to Colleen's point, it is the worst that it's going to be like now. And I don't think people really understand how powerful that statement really is. In the image to video space specifically, the quality and the speed of the generations are moving so quickly that I could almost guarantee you within the next year or so, there's going to probably be much more AI in feature films and TV series and pretty much everything that you see. And most people won't even know the difference. And that's how good and photorealistic it's gotten. So I'm really excited about the tools. I've been using Replit, after Rymar kind of mentioned, and he's been working on his browser extension for a while now. And I was like, man, maybe I could do a browser extension too, but for the image to video stuff. And so now I'm on version 3 of Render Real Estate Chrome extension, and you could basically right-click on any image on the web, and it generates a video in just a few seconds on the sidebar. And then myself and my team kind of use that internally to create real estate videos that used to take 5 to 10 hours to shoot and edit, now takes us about 5 to 10 minutes. And so we're kind of taking that value and passing it on to the consumer.
Yeah, and this is where I wish I'd like to figure out. I mean, I'm actually streaming this to YouTube right now, but nobody's watching because I didn't tell anybody, and it's mostly a test on the background for me. But I'm on your Instagram page right now, kind of going through some of these videos, and it's just cool to see. I mean, I can imagine getting this type of result. I've been watching you for a little bit, playing with these videos and kind of tinkering with some of this. So yeah, it's cool to see how fast people are moving. Which means I think people are going to break a lot of things. Lou, I showed you a tool the other day. I work at, with the DxOS team, and they handed me like this big database, and they're like, go find insights from this. And it's something I had never done, and it wasn't like they just like dumped this thing on me. And, I kind of asked for it. I said, hey, let me see what I can figure out here. And instead of going and, I could find a tool. I looked for some tools that would help me visualize some of the SQL queries and figure out like what I wanted to look at inside of the database and pull some of the tables together and just analyze some of the data. Like there was lots of tools to do this, but a lot of them were also very expensive. And so I threw it into Replit. I got a connection to the database. Next thing you know, I'm building a full tool to like help me explore these databases visually, and not just explore them visually, but create these little dynamic dashboards. And then I was like, all right, well, what if I could slap like a TL draw canvas down and start exploring these visuals in like a full, visual canvas. And next thing you know, like a weekend later, I have a tool that's letting me explore custom data. I don't have to give my data to any third-party provider. Nobody's in the middle listening or watching. This is just me and the database talking directly. And I don't need all of the other feature bloat that these other tools had. And it was just like really like an interesting moment for me. And Lou, maybe this is something I toss over to you, because I remember showing you the tool in our little weekly session, and you were kind of like, why? And we had an interesting conversation about not just like why I would do something like that, but then the fact that like I was able to get something like that built in such a short span.
Yeah. So my why is, the question I'm asking is to truly understand it, because you spent, some not trivial amount of time building it out, and I'm sure that the entire time you're doing it, you're well aware that it's possible to find a third-party tool or something open source or whatever to do what you're trying to do, and yet you kept doing it. And so I was just, it's out of curiosity that I'm asking. And what I came to understand after seeing your demo and hearing you talk about it is, one, what these tools have done, so tools like Replit have done, is completely change the build versus buy equation that I think a lot of us have ingrained in us, and that it's making building, it's shrinking the cost of building quite a lot for everybody. That's including people who work, like me, who maybe could build something like that. I could never have built what you built the standard way with standard tools and the amount of time that you did it. But I often throw together little web apps for my own usage or little scripts all the time, like as a developer for my whole, since I've learned how to code. And now it's really just opening up that possibility for way more people, and also making it possible to build way more complex things. And I'm just shocked that something that sophisticated could be built that quickly, and that you would choose to do it over just using a tool. But now that I've seen it, I completely understand why you would. And then the second thing it gives, so it's shrinking the build cost. The second thing it does is now that you have it, you can go in directions that those tools might never go. And what might happen is, in the end, you might discover a completely new thing that starts with, a SQL builder. Sure. Okay, we've seen SQL builders, before, visual SQL builders, but you're starting to go now in a direction. I'm just seeing the beginning parts of it that I'm not sure I've seen before. I'm not sure that any of those tools have or would have. And who knows where you'll be if you keep taking it this way. Who knows what you might discover is the really interesting new mashup thing. Who knows what it is, because and that might not be discovered by those tools. So I again, this ability for more and more people to build things that aren't presupposing solutions, aren't in the same mix of people who've done it before, but are just totally coming at it from out of left field. Like, I think we're going to just see just like so many interesting new things. I don't know. So that's the why for me is a why of curiosity, and I'm still, can't wait to see all the things that people are building. I think we're going to see like really new things, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, one of the interesting facets that has spoken to me for a while, is that I think most of the solutions that we have in the digital world come from a very small socioeconomic / intellectual like bubble. you know, and the Silicon Valley, the New York bubbles, the whatever, the big cultural bubbles, and most of digital invention has not been, you know, like accessible to just the average Joe. And I think that's what we're going to start seeing, is that problem solving can be kind of focused down more towards the granular level, right? It's never made sense to build software for 100 people or 1,000 people. You know, and now I think we're going to see, you know, it will be perfectly viable for that type of thing. Does anybody else have thoughts on that? You know, Tolly, Paolo,
Yeah, sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
jump in.
yeah, definitely. I think I've been thinking about this for a long time, and you know, I I speak to developers all day long. I've got a team. I'm under Drip, and we talk about about vibe coding, kind of what we're seeing happen. And I think initially there was a little bit of a worry with them of like, oh shit, are we going to be out of a job? Right? Are we going to be out of a job in a couple months, a couple years? All this time, I've been learning in school, et cetera. Is it all gone to waste? And the reality is like you're like it's not it's not that it's replacing jobs. I mean, your job will be replaced by like not by AI, but someone that's using AI. Like if you're not using it right now, and learning, you're going to be replaced by someone that is, because they can just move a lot quicker. But then the other part is, to Lou's point, people like myself and like Rymar that can't really code a single line of code, maybe we know some CSS, tinker with some HTML, whatever, grab a code snippet of JavaScript and try to like read it and figure it out. Uh, People like that, we we have crazy ideas. We can't make it happen, ourselves. It's too expensive, takes time, a lot of friction oftentimes back and forth to really like nail it. But if you have full control over the experience, kind of what you see in your mind, you could create some pretty crazy stuff, right? And so I think, definitely jumping off Lou's point here with there are going to be like brand new experiences and inventions that have never existed before because they're coming out of the minds of just a different kind of person, right? If you're a creative, more kind of right brained, you think very differently about the world than the left brain engineer, oftentimes, right? And so the fact that you can now build stuff that, yeah, you probably can't build it to scale. You need Lou at your side to help kind of direct things, or call it for advice and say, hey, I just fucked everything up. I didn't push it up to Git. Can you help me fix this? You still need that, absolutely. For now, um, so these things that we build aren't always like fully prepared for scale, especially if you're thinking about
Oh no. Of course we crashed. Fuck. God damn it. All right. Well, that was fun. Thanks, X, for rug pulling our Twitter space. So we'll maybe that's what we get for saying Twitter there.
Well, or maybe that just goes to show, I mean, there's criticism of vibe coding not being scalable, and some of it isn't, and they're being buggy and stuff like that. Well, you know, other software is buggy too.
It's so frustrating. Something like this should just be a little bit more bulletproof, if you ask me. But okay, we'll pick things back up. I see folks popping back in here. If you're just joining us, we were in the middle of a what was starting to evolve into a fairly dynamic conversation about the current state of vibes and code. So we'll see if we can jump back in. Paolo, got some thoughts?
I had some thoughts about that, and like maybe to pick up where he left off, which was like um, the gentleman was saying that things are on some kind of curve where like they're potentially like exponentially increasing in capabilities, and I think that there's definitely some kind of really interesting curve that we're on. But there's definitely some uh, very well-known deficits about AI at this point, and it does kind of seem like, oh, there's innovation happening every day. There's always an announcement of something really interesting, and it seems like it's somehow factors or orders of magnitude better than it was the day before. Um, but there's like these kind of like pretty well established ceilings on some of this stuff, and it doesn't always seem like that. And the reason it doesn't seem like that is because when you talk to an LLM, or you ask it to generate some code, do code gen, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, it has this basically this corpus of the entire internet's wealth of information, and it can recall a lot of that really quickly. But that's the thing, is it's really recalling very quickly through a very large corpus of information and doing this function approximation, right? So the problem with it is really in its um, depth of understanding, but it's not really understanding anything. It's recalling very quickly, and it's doing function approximation, and that really gives you the impression like, oh, this thing is smart, it understands something. um, but this actually gets you a long way, and I don't want to downplay the utility, because there's like just this massive amount of utility, and like there's all this good coming out of it, right? Like basically anything that's creative, like it just amplifies your ability to um to do creative things. And like he was saying, you can be untrained, or you can have like less technical skill set, and then you can do things like unstructured query language, which is super cool. um and yeah, you can have an unexperienced programmer, and even an experienced one, and have it be a productivity multiplier, like man pages or documentation for all the millions of open source projects out there. I mean, just no one can remember all this stuff, and having an LLM to be able to help you to expedite all of that, that's pretty awesome. um, but then there's like this kind of dark side which we have to navigate and try to understand, and that's when we hit the ceiling of some of this stuff, right? Like um, a lot of the code gen that's happening is super low quality. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, but a lot of the code that's being output by LLMs is really low quality. And at the end of the day, a lot of the time that doesn't matter, because the value that gets produced, that's the most important thing. The user using the thing, and their experience, that's the most important thing. But there's also something that's still important about the code, which is that when it's low quality, you end up with security vulnerabilities, and like these are super difficult things um, to mitigate when you don't have technical skills. And yeah, it might be true. You can call in somebody, um, like Lou, and say, "Hey, Lou, like we got breached. Like there's a major problem here," and the because there's a kind of compounding problem, which is like the poor code quality increases and you get this increased technical debt, and then it gets more and more difficult to bring an expert into that code base.
But this is generally no different than how software has just always been, right? It just seems like now the threshold to jumping into that dance is a little bit lower.
Well, it's kind of how software's already been, but you've always had experts who can understand their job is to like be in the code base, right? Whereas when somebody doesn't really have a technical background and they're building a product, it's more likely for them to get into a position where they don't have an expert, and then they go really long way. They kind of create all this code, and then at one point it gets more difficult to have an expert who wants to come into that code base, to take a look at it, evaluate and mitigate, security vulnerabilities, or, navigate the technical debt that's been accrued. So there's sort of this position it puts somebody in, and I've seen this like a few times already, where people who have built products, or they're in the process of trying to build a product with AI, and they've hit the ceiling. They need a developer to come in, and it's really hard to convince somebody to jump into that code base to get them what we call like the last mile problem. And a lot of people, I think, they start off with their project and it's going really well. It's going super fast. They're like making a lot of progress. They're seeing things materialize, and they're like, "This is really exciting." And then it kind of gets to the last 90% of a project, and that part's the hardest part. Like that part's where you get a feature change, and you're like, "Oh, I really need this feature change, like because it's going to make or break the product." And then you get in there and you try to do that, and you're like, like it keeps breaking. Like I keep prompting and it keeps breaking. And so these are the problems that like we're going to start to hit pretty quickly, because it's like, I think Colleen said, it's like, this is just like moving so fast, and it's getting better really quickly. And but so is the sort of negative aspects with it are kind of coming along with that journey, right? So there's like some questions about how to mitigate some of these problems, and I think that there's some people starting to think about this.
Yeah, I'd be interested to have Lou's thoughts there. Lou and I spent a good time talking about some of this last week. I tend to agree. I get super frustrated, especially with the agentic workflows where, you ask it to make a change and all of a sudden it's like running off doing 3 things you didn't even tell it to do just because it thinks it's being helpful. Claude 3.7 seems to be the worst for that type of thing. But I've also been able to get really far with a handful of things that I'm building that I think are probably close enough to, shippable features, shippable products. We just launched a full member directory today for our local community that is a wrapper around the Luma API. And it allows us to build a, simple membership directory that wraps around an existing events platform that makes it easiest for us to sell tickets and manage events and, all the other stuff that Luma does. But now we have a little portal for us to kind of have just, a central community hub, members only content. People can RSVP on our website. And then more specifically, us as admins now have a control panel for everyone to be able to see what was going on. Beforehand, it was just like a Webflow site and, some of my automations in Airtable and some random stuff on the back end. And none of the other group organizers had any kind of visibility into like what was happening with the community. And it's not a crazy community, but, we throw a meetup every month and we've got a couple hundred people that RSVP and, it's growing. And I think other people could also use this type of thing in the world of Luma. So, it's interesting to see that obviously it's not like cutting edge, state of the art. We're not breaking any ground with little CRUD apps. But Lou, do you want to jump? Do you have a thought on what Heapwolf was saying? And then
Sure.
Paul, I'll kick it back to you after this.
And just so in my career, I've worked for 4 startups. 2 of those startups, a while ago, 92 and in 2004, like way before all this stuff, were started by non-professional programmers. People who did not know how to program, had an idea, taught themselves how to program, were able to put enough of something together that was that thing that they made was total mess inside. but solved a real customer need and made them a lot of money, which they used to hire developers like myself to come and professionalize their code bases. And honestly, I don't see the difference right now. What I'm seeing in these code bases is not a order of magnitude or stepwise difference from code I've seen just being made the normal way by, I'm going to just say, less skilled developers just doing what they could know how to do by coding normally, not with AI. This is pre-AI. And all I can say is, if your intention is to make something that's going to be real and big and sustainable, concentrate on getting money and use that money to get some professionals in. I don't think you'll be able to take Vibe-like coding all the way, but I don't even think you'll have to. If the thing is not successful, then it won't matter. If the thing is successful, then you'll be able to afford the help. I'm not worried that you won't be able to find developers who want to help you. I don't think, the list of giant code bases that are a total mess that have, the entire, let's say, the entire insurance industry, the entire, built in COBOL, still running, went through a giant Y2K problem, had to solve it by getting developers to work for them. Like I don't see the problem as different than that in kind. So I don't know. So I guess I'm not worried about that. I am worried that there will be people who try to take it too far and they're going to run into real problems. But I don't think that's any different than what already happens. But maybe not. But that's how I see it right now.
I think there's a huge difference. Like, we're generating code faster than we've ever generated it before. There's new people coming into the space who've never been in it before. There's certainly differences, and there's certainly a kind of person who's coming in without without the experience, say for example, that you have, scraping your knees a few times and knowing, oh, hey, these are some serious pitfalls that I should avoid. Like, that kind of knowledge is something that somebody with 30 years of experience definitely gets, right?
Sure,
And
but when I
so,
had 8 years of experience, I added a SQL injection bug into an app I wrote. So I
right,
mean,
but I mean, that's a a small anecdotal thing. I mean, there's a lot of
sure,
people
and
right now
there are
we've
a lot
seen.
of SQL injection problems
Yeah.
in the current web. But I don't disagree with you, really. I think the difference between us is not as much as it might seem, but I think these problems are like the problems we already have. But you're right that the magnitude is a difference. The number of these things is could be way larger.
It also seems rather inevitable, right? That like it's just going to continue to stack. Because I'm not going to stop building, right? I mean, I can think back to when I started tinkering with WordPress way back when in 2012, just because I was starting out as an entrepreneur and I wanted to share a blog, and I was like, oh, people are blogging, and there was social media, but social media was pretty early, and it just felt like a website was a better move. And so, you get fascinated with publishing things on the internet, and then a blog goes viral, and next thing you know, someone wants to pay you to build a website, and you're like, oh, this is cool. People will pay me to build things on this thing called the internet. And next thing you know, you stumble in a tool like Webflow, and you start seeing these no-code tools evolve, and you see the Airtables and the Integromats and the Zapiers and all these other kind of workflow tools build on top of that. And now you're seeing things like Replit, which I think take all of that one stack further, put the AI in the mix, and allow you to do a whole nother thing. I just don't know how you can slow it down or stop it. So I kind of hear what Paulo's saying, and I understand this is opening up some kind of Pandora's box. And then I also hear Lou saying this is kind of how things go, and maybe the industry's seen it, maybe not at this scale, but I just wonder, is it just going to continue to get worse or more prolific, which it seems inevitable.
Well, I guess more of what I'm thinking is not that like um is it a problem, is more of an opportunity, right? I mean, there's certainly going to be some second and third order effects here that are kind of different from the ones that we've seen. And I think one of the biggest ones is just out of the fact that LLMs are doing code gen, and code gen is pretty much non-deterministic, right? And like one of the things that we've always tried to do with software, right, is to try to achieve determinism, right? And it's really difficult to get reliable results. And I think that like what happens is, it causes a certain amount of prompting over prompting over prompting over prompting to try to understand, for some people, to try to produce the thing that they want to produce, right? And so, I don't know, do we know people who are working on tools who are trying to solve this problem? Because it seems like there's a lot of evidence pointing to this last mile problem, right? Where like people are excited about building things and they're building these demos, or like kind of like you were talking about these um, early stage things, which are great proof of concepts, but they're very difficult to take to the last, to get them to be polished and to have sophistication and to go to market with them and have them be valuable so that people want to pay for them and they can be businesses. Like what kind of tools do we know or people do we know working on these kind of problems they're trying to solve for this?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like half the internet right now is trying to tinker on something. Um,
Well, this is a pretty specific problem, though. I mean, this is like, if you look at Cursor, or
you're
if you
talking
look
about the
at like,
context window specifically, or
not necessarily the context window, but like, I mean, if you look at a product like Cursor, or you look at a product like Replit, like they're really great at getting you started, but maybe I'm not really sure what to call it, but the last mile problem, right? Where like, it starts off strong and you got the ball bouncing around in the cube, but then you're like, oh, and I want the user to be able to enter text in 3D, and then suddenly, bringing in this new requirement makes it super challenging, right? And you can use a tool like Cursor to kind of keep, hitting the button and saying, yeah, try it again, try it again, try it again. And then I'm curious, like, what percentage of these things that people start off with do they just say, okay, well, screw it, I can't get it working? And then what kinds of approaches are there for people to, actually mitigate
So
this and deal with this
I
problem?
a couple of
But
weeks ago, I wrote a LinkedIn post, kind of like asking this kind of question that you're asking now, and I talked about this concept of an intrinsically safe environment, and this comes from chemical manufacturing. The idea that in a chemical factory, you wouldn't want to bring in any object that could spark a fire, and so any object that comes in, physical object, has to be deemed intrinsically safe to be brought in. And I talked about this idea of an intrinsically safe, quote unquote, vibe coding environment. Like what might that be, where you can't in this environment you can prompt and prompt and prompt, but all you're gonna be making is the application logic part of the code and not the system part of the code. So you would always have safe APIs with limits. You would always have secrets and secrets being safely stored. You would always have no chance of SQL injection problems or other injection problems. And when I did that, there was a couple of posts, and again, this is totally unvetted, but there were a couple of people who had some ideas and were working on this. And they were in niche ideas. But a friend posted that he was working on something called Board. I'm going to just put it as an example. It's called boardweaver.com. So BOARD Weaver, and what it was for, it can only make board games, but it's still a vibe coding environment for constructing your own board game. But by restricting the environment to just that, what you were making was always going to be safe. Like to make, you would not be opening yourself up to security problems because you weren't mixing the system parts with the application logic parts in the same deployable. And then there was another system that someone posted, also similarly niche, called Keel, Keel, .so. A similar type niche thing where everything you are creating is more data oriented and schema based, and you could only make certain kinds of applications in it, but any of those applications you made in it were going to be like what I call intrinsically safe. So I think that's kind of the direction I'd like to see, where you're not making like when you go into a Replit and you just start making a website, you're making the parts that are also the system parts that are
like the back end stuff too.
Not just the back end, but like maybe you want to have back end application logic. That's fine, but you're making the routing system in Express. You're making you're making the SQL, the part that's turning user information into SQL scripts, SQL queries, and that's where all the trouble comes. And you're exposing the API without any kind of API rate limiting, without any API, like it's just that's an exposed API just on the internet. You're responsible. I mean, it seems to do it right by default, but you're responsible for secrets management in your code. And if that gets undone somehow by the prompting, you're not going to know that that's happening. And there's all kinds of things mixed in, but also there's your application logic, which is the part you should be prompting for. It's just all mixed together, and the agent is able to change any of it based on your prompts. And to me, that's going to be the root of the problems. And I'd like to see a separation where I kind of inherit an architecture.
Don't you then give up some of the flexibility? And then I want to go to Colleen. I know, Colleen, you were itching to jump in a second ago.
Go ahead.
But yeah, I feel like you give up some of the flexibility there, right? You lose the freedom, I think.
I don't want to say you lose the freedom. I'm gonna say you lose some.
You lose some freedom. Yeah.
Some freedom, but I think it's a trade-off that that a lot of people should make. but if you can't build your system this way, then fine. But if you can.
Colleen, what say you?
Yeah, I think we're still in the crawling phase. I mean, just think about how young a lot of these tools are. I mean, Cursor just came out, I think August of this past year. Windsurf was like November, and they were building on something else that had already existed. So I think in some ways we're expecting a lot for tools that are still very, very early in their life cycle. And I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, if you take a look at like Shopify released last week, a statement about how prototyping now needs to be done with AI, that everybody needs to be using AI as part of their jobs. Doesn't matter who you are in the company. It's, the CEO, the executive team, all the way down. And so you've got that. You've got other major companies with massive code bases predicting that, I can't even remember what the numbers are, but significant chunks of their code is now being developed with AI, and that they're projecting that. And so I think the tools to be handling large code bases and some of these other things are going to be adapting and evolving. I mean, even just looking last week at Firebase, which Google released, one of the first prominent things once you get going is it's wanting to help you write test cases and test scripts with whatever it is that you're doing. And that's the first time of the tools that I've used and experimented with, seeing like that testing and that verification and making sure that everything is okay was so kind of front and center. So, and I just also kind of that last mile problem, that's a problem with a lot of projects too. You get 80% done, you get 90% done, and sometimes it's that last mile. And so just because AI is having maybe some issues and you're having to prompt and prompt again and not really getting anywhere, I think that some of that's going to go away, and kind of also goes back to what I was saying earlier of I feel like I'm having to learn how to think differently. And so I think some of it's also just on us and our relationship with these tools and how we're approaching it. And we need to learn.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I think, I mean, if you go back to like the advent of any kind of form of communication and the necessity for like folks that can deal in the abstractions or the the complexity of it, you always have more, and that continues to go as you scale up through like AM and FM radio. Like we still have radio stations even though we have podcasts, and we still have television even though we have streaming, and we have all these mediums that just stack, and we're using more and more bandwidth than we ever have. And I think it's going to be the same type of thing in the development space. I think we're still quite a whiles out from like any kind of AGI or this stuff being good enough to just fire off, like the random person's just going to fire off a prompt in one shot, like a fully functional application. Like just thinking about how much I've had to wrestle with some of these tools to get fairly basic stuff figured out. It's still not a solved problem. And I keep telling folks it feels like we're maybe pre.com crash. Maybe we're like in the early late 90s, early 2000s here, as we know the internet's going to change everything, but we don't exactly know how, and these tools are just going to have to shake out for a while. But the workflows are going to change quite a bit. Lou, you and I were talking about how a smaller team can just be so much more efficient. One person, two people, three people can now do things that maybe required a team of 5 or 6 or 8 before. Totally. I mean, I know you're moving super fast, but yeah, I mean, the dynamic is.
I'd actually like for people to think this way. You don't need a smaller team. Like, or you shouldn't be thinking to need a smaller team. You should be thinking, what can I build even bigger? What ideas can I do that are even bigger than the big ideas I might have? Where can you go that was just impossible to go with the team you might be able to have, and seek bigger growth and more revenue rather than trying to find cost cuttings. That's what I recommend to my clients.
Yeah, and I guess I just mean in that context, like folks like small, like myself, like like most of the time I've ever had a technical idea, the limitation has always been cost to hire a development team.
Sure.
That prototyping phase, and not even that. Like, let's say there have been times where I could afford a development team, and I've invested tens of thousands of dollars into software only to wrestle with some mediocre team who never delivered anything even close to what I'm getting with this vibe code stuff, right? And I've smacked my head against bad development teams and unclear requirements. And then not only that, but sometimes you only discover things as you start wrestling with the product itself. And so it's like you can only know so much about what you want to build until you start getting your hands dirty. And so in that context, like I don't know that there's been another tool in my life that's empowered me as much as these AI tools have over the last 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that they're amazing. I think people, what I would hope happens is that people use this as a way. It's absolutely a great way of getting started. No question in my mind that it's a great way of getting started. And I would say, seek if you're trying to build a business, seek revenue. Try to get things. Try to find the early customers, and then just use that to fuel, to add whatever it is you think AI isn't giving you in the process, whether that be professional software development or whatever you think it is. More people who more in between, who knows? But I think it's part of the mix. Like it's going to be part of there's just no way that I'm gonna vibe code prototypes are not going to be part of the mix. And again, I'm a huge fan of them, so I'm not. It's not a problem for me at all. I think it's great.
Yeah. All right, Paolo. Any thoughts there? Any other thoughts coming in from the crowd here? I know there's a bunch of places we could go. We could also just put a pin in it. We're at about an hour mark. I know we had the break with the technical hurdle, but yeah.
I'd like to chime in real quick, just looking out into the future a little bit more. There's this paper going around, I think it's like AI-2027.com. I'll drop it in the chat for everybody. And it's basically like this timeline of where we are now with regards to AI and where it's going to be in just a few short years. And then, taking it further to like, let's say 2030, which is, only like 5 years away, with like the exponential growth and the velocity that's heading, especially with robotics coming into the play, and cars are self-driving now, and we're seeing a lot of automation in warehouses and things like that. Who knows? Maybe like money will be totally different in just 5 years. Maybe there won't, so much of, this is kind of like the optimist in me. As long as like Terminator doesn't come and kill all of us. By the way, say please and thank you to your LLM, just in case. But yeah, who knows? Maybe in 5 years, money is totally different, just because so much efficiency has been created. What's your take on that, everyone?
I think we're so far away from anything that looks like an AGI, and I don't know that means that some of what you're talking about won't actually happen or won't meaningfully impact the world. But I think we're just a step layer away or two from some meaningful stuff here. Like, this thing's just kind of regurgitating a lot of what's happening. There's no real original thought in a lot of what's happening right now. I am not like I just think it's going to take a little bit more time than people think to actually permeate. I don't mean to say that it won't be disruptive or that it won't like break a lot of things along the way. I don't know. I could be completely wrong. I'd be open to other folks' interpretations.
Who was the guy who was I can't remember who he was, but he was talking about how with the steam engine, because it had arrived, it wasn't going to put anybody out of business. In fact, it was just going to create more business. I mean, same thing kind of applies here. I can't remember what the guy's name is. There's like a pretty well-known law around this, right? When like something that's like a multiplier arrives, like it doesn't really put other people out of work, it just creates more work. So there's probably going to be like this just massive increase in like the things people can do, so they will do it.
Yeah, I guess that's what that's another thought I have, is that like it must do that. If we're going to have any kind of stable society, Mr. Hackett, we're going to send it to Colleen and then over to you for sure. Thanks for joining us. Like, if humans are going to be meaningful in society, then they need to have, purpose. And that means they need to have jobs and meaningful input to some kind of mechanism. And so like, if we're going to like maintain a stable society, like folks have to have some kind of system of worth that's tied to their intellectual output and physical output. And so if we think we're just going to automate all these things away and not create like crazy levels of societal shift without like finding new ways to distribute the incentives around how we like do society, then like that's a whole different conversation. I think like that's probably a deeper conversation that can lead us all the way to the Matrix. Colleen, go ahead, and then over to Mr. Hackett.
Yeah, I would say I started reading this book. It's actually Eric Schmidt, who had been at Google. I can't remember the third author, and then Henry Kissinger, which I was a little surprised of all people. And one of the things that they were talking about that I thought was interesting is that we often point to things like, oh, the introduction of the printing press, things were fine. The introduction of this technology, the introduction of this technology, we did okay as a society. However, AI is not just touching one aspect of life. It is touching everything, including politics, including how people are going to make a living. And we haven't undergone anything that is touching basically everything all at once at such a fast pace that I'm not so sure. I'm optimistic, and I do think it's probably a bigger topic maybe for another day. So I may be a little on a different
Well, I
tangent
mean,
than everybody else.
I'm happy to send this thing off the deep end for a few minutes as we wrap up to just go like all in. We can go. I don't want to say doomer, but we could go like prognosticator mode, and we can kind of close with thinking about what we see as the landscape and the next what's over the horizon here. So, Mr. Hackathon, what say you? I see you popping up here with your hand up. Thanks for waiting patiently.
Hey, can everybody hear me okay?
Seems like it.
Okay, perfect. So I usually frame this in two ways when I do lectures around this. The first way is for me, and I have a technical background, but I've really built my brand around no code and low code. And when I look at the history of developing software, year after year, or maybe even every 5 years or every 10 years, what we've really had is abstraction away from the technical complexities of developing software. So you think about where software originally started and how hard it was to create anything. And then you move forward, and then we had cloud computing. Now we have companies like Stripe. And if you want to integrate payments, it might take you 30 minutes. And to me, this is just a natural evolution of all of that when we talk about vibe coding. And all of that has made everything more accessible for everybody. Now, where I think a lot of the pushback is around, and this was touched on a little bit, but where I think the pushback is around employment. I think there's natural and really reasonable fears around employment, especially in software engineering fields. And I haven't really heard too many answers around that. What I'm hearing from tech executives is, yeah, we're reducing our workforce and we're gonna not hire any software engineers anymore. That doesn't actually help anything in terms of the sentiment in the labor markets. And I think a lot of the pushback is around fear of employment. But abstraction away from the more technical components of developing software that's what's been happening the whole time. Yeah, those are my 2 points.
I just want to add to that as a founder and as an employer and as somebody who's been in tech for 25 years, as an engineer, how I see this and how it's affected changed my thoughts on hiring is that the bar has been raised. It means that a good coder can be significantly more productive because they have the ability to access and to be able to expedite their work faster, and it's a force multiplier. And I think when it comes to people being afraid of the ability to be employed, it's because the bar has been raised and there's a lot more that you need to know to come in to be a software engineer at this point. Like, it's just not enough to know some HTML, some CSS, and JavaScript. It's those are trivial things at this point. Like anything, that can be built with an LLM is trivial, and it is not necessarily something that that you're going to try to hire a position for. And so we've stopped hiring for positions like that. Anything that can be created with an LLM isn't necessarily high value. Things that can't be created by LLMs, and there's a lot, those are definitely positions that can be hired for.
And how do you see the role of somebody with the LLM? Because I guarantee you, me with Replit versus some schmo off the street with Replit is not the same stack of, intellect against the machine world,
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes somebody with some awareness and some background and even some experience, and the more experience, the more valuable the person can be with that tool. It's really augmentation, right? It's like, so you want to, when I think in terms of hiring, I think about the experience somebody has, and then how we just say by default, like an LLM is just going to it's going to be a force multiplier.
Yeah. All right, let's kick it over to No Code Pro Code. What's up? How are you?
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yep, we got you loud and clear.
Very cool. Yes, I mean, I've been a very strong, I've been very strong against AI, and I've been fully into that no-code direction. But I've been coming to the realization more and more that no-code just simply can't scale. There are limitations, especially with the front end. With the backend, it's a little bit different because you're not going to be. It's not going to be too complex unless you're going to reinvent something or build some sort of, I don't know, CI/CD pipeline or whatever. But when you're building something with the front end, like a front end application, a social media network or a community, right? This is something that is not like it's not, where you need to file an IP for. So AI does a way better job at getting this together because it uses the best technologies out there and it learns from the best, almost, the part of the whole part of the internet that's not WordPress, and there's sadly too much of that, is React. And that's what, AI uses, that's the best out there. There's no no-code tool using React. The no-code tools are just faking being React, if that makes sense, right? So what AI development brought on there is you're actually going to use a real framework. You're actually going to use technology that people outside of your tool actually want to use, because I don't think anybody wants to use any of those no-code technologies and how their frameworks are set up if they wouldn't have that visual editor, because it is just second class, and not even that second class is too good. It's just worse than second-class technology most of the times. It's way behind the current trends. And with AI, we have the opportunity to, without having to know and have that computer science background or whatever, and even most of the people that have that background still can't build in with a little application, but without having that, that knowledge necessarily, that experience, we can build applications that follow those standards that are modern in the web, if that makes sense, right? And I remember you posted something and said, you could have never gone that far like you're going right now in building your community if it wouldn't be for AI. And you've tried no-code tools. I've tried plenty of them, but everything that you've done with no-code is always a hack, right? The platform doesn't support it, and you can get very good at hacking your way around it. But at the end, you're trying to just write some JavaScript to force the tool to do something that's not designed for. And it's just so much easier just learning it the right way. And AI is a great teacher. And you don't have to understand necessarily the code you're writing, at least for the front end. For the back end, I do prefer, for example, my backend, I'll just set that up in Xano, even if I'm going to use Lovable or Replit, just because I want to be in control of that, of my webhooks, right? Make sure that all that works, because I don't trust myself with AI to build this working Stripe integration. But for the front end, I have to say it's completely changing the way I look at building applications, because just no code can't beat that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a game changer. I mean, I could probably do most of what I've been doing with some semblance of AI tool. Of no code tools. And I've done things like that in the past. You put together Zapier and Integromat, and maybe you write a little webhook or whatever, there's lots of different things you can do, but
it's more of the low level no code.
Not only that, but then there's so many nuanced dependencies inside of there that's not just, hey, there's the API and then my front end could just talk to directly.
Somebody updates their API, and then your make scenarios aren't triggering, and it's just
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just versus doing it right in the back. And it's like, okay, so maybe I don't know how to write this API request, but the AI does, and I know that I need to write this API request to do X, Y, or Z. Yeah. And so I can have something else write me this API request using the documentations in a syntax that I maybe don't understand. But it's not like I'm not orchestrating these things or synchronizing the logic or the business systems that do all this stuff. I just don't need to.
You are the domain expert, and it's like you having a programmer follow your instruction, with the difference that the AI is probably following your instructions a little bit better than if you were actually going to hire someone.
Well, this is it. I've been beating my head against developers my whole life
Yes.
And there's not very many developers. Like, this is not a dig on developers, but there's probably not very many developers who would ever want someone like me sitting over their shoulder saying, try this, move it a little bit like this. Hey, what about this way? What about that? And then working like
Yes.
that for, let's say, 6 hours. And then at the end being like, that's stupid. Let's throw it all away.
Well,
And
they
and
gotta
start-
come out.
hang
with
on,
some
hang
sort
on.
of
Hey,
vibe coding tool.
just like, hang on. And then it's your turn and then it'll be my turn. And that's how it works.
Sure.
Don't interrupt. So, like just having the ability to do those things and not, have to fight with the developer or get wrapped up about, like, how much is this going to cost, or damn, did we just throw away a week's worth of work, or whatever the thing is, right? Like, the AI is never going to that's never got mad at me, for doing that. And I know developers would, and I know it's ridiculously expensive sometimes to do those types of things. And so in that regard, it's just been super, it's just a game changer. Mr. Hackathon, I see you with a hand up. What say you? You got another?
I do think some of the focus is in the wrong place. And I think it's natural because there's literally new tools coming out every week. But I don't think the focus should be on the tools. And that was my whole thing with no code too. Like, often with content, people will say, oh, what tool should I use? And I don't actually care whether it's about coding, no code, or AI. I don't care. I just want the thing done. But I think there's a process revolution going on. Like, the way we do things is changing. There was someone a little bit earlier that was speaking about in employment and hiring. What does it mean that now one of your employees has their own team of assistants and agents? And how does that change how they work? Or if we have a Slack channel and we have, I don't know, 5 team members in our Slack channel, and now we have 3 AI agents in the Slack channel, how does that change the whole dynamic of how we work, how we come up with ideas? And I think that's where it's actually a lot more interesting. And that's actually where I think it's going to impact a lot of companies a lot more. The tools are the tools. You're going to, Cursor, Windsurf, Tray, to me, they're all very similar and they're all trying to do the same thing. But the processes and how that integrates with your company, I think that's going to look very, very different from company to company, from country to country, from the size of the company. And that's what I'm actually interested in seeing.
Yeah, I agree. Lou, what's going on? Oop. Mic check to Lou. Got your hand up. Yes, no.
Lou, are you
Sorry,
muted?
I
Oh.
was muted.
All good.
I was actually wanted to say something along the lines of where Colleen was going. So it's a little winding back a little, but maybe I also think it's interesting where we're going now. But I wanted to I agree with Colleen that maybe this innovation is something different, and that we aren't required that the world just adapt to innovations and find new work for everybody. That's not a requirement of the world. It's always happened, but maybe this is something different. And it reminds me of this kind of, it's a little old, it's kind of prescient YouTube video from, I don't even know how many years ago, more than 5 years ago, I think, though, called Humans Need Not Apply, about the coming AI.
CGP Grey.
Yeah, CGP Grey. And it was about how, starts with the idea of like horses being replaced by cars, and how what we didn't find new jobs for horses. We just have a lot fewer horses now than
Every
had,
human used to have to hunt
before
or
there were
gather
cars. And then he makes the argument that that in this new world we might not need as many people. Now, another thing that's happening, and just again get into a doomer type thing, is that worldwide we are having lower birth rates, and it's happening at a level that has exponential decay, the opposite of exponential growth. Like, so if you look out at some of these predictions of worldwide population out 50 years, out 100 years, it's quite alarming how low it might be. And so I don't know. Like, I'm wondering if like this is will be a necessary innovation to make a world with far fewer people possible. And that's my optimistic take on it.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, if you look at a lot of the modern major populations, they have an inverted population pyramid, which means at some point a lot of the demographic is going to be way older than the base, which creates real problems for how do you then pay for those things and sustain that. And I mean, none of this takes into account any of the economic turmoil or what we're seeing with obviously the political climate. And like AI is a big facet of this, but there's so many other like crazy things happening all at once right now that it's almost impossible to think about any single one of them independently. I mean, yeah, we could go down a big rabbit hole on that one. I think we'll probably leave that for the next one, but Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, just I keep thinking about Figure, the robotics company. If any of you checked it out, I think the CEO's name's Brett Adcock. And
what is it called?
Figure, Figure. So I think besides Tesla, Figure is the leading company in robotics, and they actually have decreased their time to market on humanoid robots in the home. Like originally at the end of last year, they said, oh, we'll be out in 2027. And then like in March, they were like, listen, we've had some crazy breakthroughs and we're getting to the point where we want to start shipping these robots like Q3, Q4 of this year. And I've been kind of, going down the rabbit hole of the robotics thing. And now that AI has combined with robotics, not only from a manufacturing standpoint, but from actual operations, it's really crazy. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen like two robots working together on one kind of neural network to complete some tasks, organize items that they've never seen before, work together to, do this and do that. And I really think that this whole robotics thing is, I think, like an underestimated, an underestimated thing that could potentially change our world, like completely. Like, put aside, code and things like that. Like once AI really starts getting into the physical, like what was that Peter Thiel quote? We wanted flying cars, but we got 140 characters. I think once the technology really starts touching us, like in physical space, I think that's when people will really take a step back and be like, wow, like things are really changing. This isn't just hype. This isn't just like vibe code. Like there's literally a robot in my house, like cooking me dinner or doing my laundry or something like that. So I don't know how many of you want one of these, but like, I'll take two.
I wish they would hurry up and come over here and do my dishes or something instead of doing all the instead of making the art.
Fold my laundry.
Please.
I will pay a lot of money for somebody that will fold my laundry.
Yeah, come over here and mop my floors. Like, I'm not trying to, don't make the images. I'll make the images. You mop the floor.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing that I'll say about that, that's where I think like if robots can truly change our humanoid robots could truly change our world within the next like 2-3 years. The efficiency, and if you do the math on the numbers and just the value that's created through that, even a normal person would be able to rent a robot for like $500 a month, to do things around the house. And the amount of time, it's like a magnitude of difference that a lot of people are underestimating right now. But I really think it could be the thing that, by 2030, wwho knows, maybe money is still around, but maybe it's just like,
money's not going anywhere.
I'm not saying it's going anywhere, but I'm saying what you're seeing even in these AI tools and what you're doing is it's leveling the playing field.
Sure.
It's allowing people to access certain things that they could have never dreamed of, and giving them time and the efficiency to do so. So that's something that I'm really excited. That's beyond the hype.
Yeah, let's kick it over to Heap Wolf, and then we'll go to No Code Pro Code.
There's a really super good video that Royal Institute just released about robot swarms. So they talk about, there's a lecture in the famous room where the lecturer, she talks about the decreasing cost of robots and the amount that we're able to create and how fast they're being created. And this actually is really close to what we're working on. So we work on peer-to-peer stuff, and we work on distributed computing stuff. We created a protocol for peer-to-peer, and it's very real to see the applications, the computing, and pretty much all of the software move away from this like client server kind of architecture that we've been doing for like the last like forever, and move towards where robots are talking to each other directly without needing to do round trips to a data center. This is like kind of an inevitable thing because basically client server is this sort of naturally occurring bottleneck. And so as all of this kind of compute and networking moves away from the data center into these robots and doing basically swarming, there's very, very real new set of really interesting problems to build software for, and then it'll just kind of be this compounding thing that happens because LLMs are going to enable people to solve those problems better, people who have those skills. So yeah, I highly recommend that Swarming Robots talk from Royal Institute. It's really good.
Yeah, all the Perimeter Institute stuff is super good, but I'm gonna have to check that one out. All right, No Code Pro Code, we'll kick it over to you, and then we'll make one final round here, and then we'll just we'll wind it down on this little last beat here.
Yeah, great. One thing that I think a lot of people are not thinking about, one thing that we have in our team is we have people who know Swift and we have people who know YAML and people who know JavaScript. But the people who know JavaScript don't know Swift. The people who know Swift don't, and AI is making it super simple for all of us to communicate with each other. Because we don't understand necessarily with each other at that level. Because we don't understand necessarily doing or how their code is working. But now just being able to just take a look and, have AI explain that to you. I think AI is a great teacher. And ultimately, it is going to help us learn more. And what I'm very excited about is MCPs. If you take a look, we've been talking about robots. Imagine you can just build an MCP and you can plug that into your robot, and then you have all that data coming into your robot. And it has the data from, I don't know, your lights or from your smart home appliances, right? And then you have that MCP that connects with your Samsung dishwasher, and it's going to be very interesting. Then when the dishwasher is done, it sends a message through the MCP, and then you can just get out there and put everything. I think we're going to live in very exciting times. I do think AI is it will be very interesting when it comes to communication across devices with those new protocols. But also, since we're talking about the labor force before, I think bringing the labor force together and creating smaller teams that accomplish more. I think that is what we're seeing. That's why we're seeing massive tech layoffs, because most people in tech are just being paid to just not do too much, if that makes sense.
Yep. Heapwolf, I'm actually thinking maybe we need to do the next one of these should be fully on, the decentralized / protocol / some of the peer-to-peer stuff. I'd be interested to see that conversation, because these technologies, going back to what we were talking about, if we eliminate the incentives, which is that, if we think about most of the modern world, or not even the modern world, like most of all of human society up until this point, humans lived inside of a feudal system. And by that, I mean that, we did not own anything. It's very recently that humans own stuff, on an individual level at scale. And on the internet, we're rebuilding like these digital feudal systems. And I think one of the real things, if this vibe code, if the AI, if whatever, any of this stuff becomes anything meaningful, it will have to come alongside of a redistribution of the incentive structures that allow us to like monetize our work or protect our intellectual capital or just preserve basic privacy rights. If we don't have those things, then it's impossible to have a stable society. Like if you can't have privacy, if you can't have commerce outside of, government oversight and corporate interjection at every step, then you don't have a free society. And I think that's really where all of this comes to a head, right? It's like these tools are going to be great up until they disagree with that zeitgeist. And that's what I think will be interesting to see. And that's where I think there's a bevy of conversations to be had. One of the reasons I wanted to do this space was just to test and experiment. I've been streaming this to YouTube. I'd like to get these to be more visual and engaging, and maybe just pick topics every once in a while, bring folks with specific expertise or subject matter knowledge to talk about some of these things. Because, I don't know. I think these conversations can go all over the place. I'm interested to think and talk about these things. I'm always ingesting information and ruminating about the geopolitical and technological implications of this stuff at scale as well as on a local level. So anyway, just saying that I'd love to nerd out on these things continuing moving forward. If we want to pick new topics and carry on the conversation, I think we're probably at a good breakpoint for today. But Toli, any final thoughts? Colleen, any final thoughts? Daniel, we'll send it around the horn one time real quick just to give everyone a last little minute to just chime out here.
Oh, this was great. I'm, I think you know me well enough, Rymar, that I could be, I'm an optimist. I'm kind of an eternal optimist about this stuff, and about just generally. And so, to hear another perspective, especially from, people, deeper, kind of the coding space, actual developers, talking about this, and also non-developers, is important to hear, right? Because we can be excited and optimistic about kind of what we have, these new tools to play with, but that's not necessarily representative of reality here. So it's fun to listen in and participate a little bit.
Yeah. Maybe what I'll do is I'll start seeing if we can pull in some just, I don't know, maybe we'll collect some topics. Colleen, we've done some of this stuff before. I don't know if you're interested. Maybe we start figuring out how to keep some new topics and some fresh fodder. See Josh Lowe in the house. What's up? We're just winding down here, but welcome. Paolo, any closing thoughts before we get out of here?
Just it's really cool that you're doing a space with just the kind of some stuff either directly or indirectly around vibe coding, AI, kind of just giving people the chance to socialize on some of these weird kind of ambiguous, nebulous sort of things that are happening in this space. It's all happening really fast, and it's really nice to kind of have people to think out loud with.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of want these to be, is kind of more community focused conversations. I don't know that vibe code was just kind of high on my mind because I've been kind of on the vibe code horse these last few months, but I think like topics, I have a handful of topics that I think would be very interesting. And what I'd really like to do is just maybe even have folks bring like just bring an interesting news article, bring something you found in the last week, and we just start throwing things up that are interesting. And it's like, hey, here's this product I found, here's this news article I saw, and it's just like a show and tell. Or maybe it's like, hey, this is this cool thing I built, or look at what this thing can do now. And everyone jumps in, we try it out. It'd be cool to start creating like user groups. I know a lot of us are building things that could use feedback from real users. So part of what I want this to be is not just like a little conversational group, but like, how can we start tinkering with the stuff that we're building and maybe build a shared audience that like when it's time for one of us to launch something, we can launch one of these talks and have 50 or 100 people hanging out with us to kick off a moment where one of us puts a product out into the world or something like that. And so that's where I think the like let the AI do the building and the other stuff, but like let's us do the human connection stuff and see if we can leverage this technology to help amplify each other's voice and efforts on the internet.
I love all of that. I mean, I love the tools and such, and I hate how every day it's here's 10, amazing things that can do, without having, I don't think there's many spaces where some of these conversations are happening. So I'm excited about all that, and I'd love to see what other folks are doing, actually building, and issues that are being encountered, and thoughts that are being said. I feel like I'm accumulating all kinds of tons of tidbits that I just don't necessarily know where to put or how to share that knowledge. So yeah, love all that.
The perennial problem, Colleen. This is our life's work. Maybe one day we're going to solve that problem real nicely. All right. Anybody else? Closing thoughts, Mr. Hackathon, Daniel, No Code Pro Code. Any final stuff? Otherwise, we'll send it off into the sunset here. And
I just want to say thanks for having this space and for giving us as Colleen said to talk about those things, because there's always a video. Oh, this great tool. Check this out. But how do we know? How do how do we know? Kind of like, can we connect with people who are using it? And I think it's great to have a space where we can talk about those things and just go beyond the hype.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
And I want to thank you for organizing this.
Yeah,
I really
appreciate you for popping in here. And good to chat and see some of the faces. Mr. Hackathon, what's up, brother?
For me, I want to thank you too. And I think I want to give a reminder, to keep building. I do think there's a lot of hype in the space. And for me, the only way I know what's real and what's not real is if I actually build with the tools myself. And there's a lot of people, especially on X, are having thoughts and comments, but not actually trying Windsurf or Tray or whatever the platform is. So yeah, build and think for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the best advice. It's like, Colleen, going back to some of what you were saying, it's these tools are moving so fast that I know a lot of people, you try something, it doesn't do exactly what you want, you write it off, and then, you start telling other people like, oh, it'll never do that. It can't do that. There's no way you're doing that. And the tool has just kind of evolved. There was a moment probably 2 months ago where I had used Replit and, I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then I went and I actually did something and it worked. And I was like, oh, this is not the same tool I used 2 weeks ago. And yeah, there was like just a moment where I was like, oh, this is something totally different here that's evolving. So it's going to be fun to see how all these tools expand. I've kind of been missing, we used to do a lot of live streams and media stuff, YouTube and Twitter stuff. So I kind of been missing that. I've been tinkering, so maybe I'll start figuring out how to stream some of these vibe code sessions. Totally. I know you've been doing a lot of that on the Abstract Network. So maybe I'll follow suit, but I'll plan on the next one. I'll follow up with another link. Let's do another one of these sometime soon in the next week or so.
Cool. I'm in. Yeah, people love the visual stuff with video to see something come to life,
Right.
especially as you're talking to them. And you take breaks when it's generating code and look at something else. People have ADD, so
that's what I think. It might be
great for
fun
this.
to figure out how do you build something like live, that's part of it, or tinker with things that are, so it's like, yeah, we're hanging out, but then also maybe something's evolving in the background as that's happening. So it's like, we're talking about some stuff, but something's tinkering in the back. I don't know, but we'll keep experimenting. I'm excited to experiment with this stuff. So yeah, thanks everyone for hanging out with us.
Anybody want to jump on YouTube with me? I'm always building, collaborating with other builders on YouTube. So
yeah, for sure. Send I'll drop a follow here and let's connect. I'm of the mindset, I have I have a URL that I've been sitting on for a long time now called Audience Owned. And I have a dream for fundamentally rewriting the rules for what advertising is. And I think for most of what the internet has become, advertising has been about these big software platforms kind of abstracting all of the value that we create as network nodes and sucking that as as an attention layer that they then arbitrage a la advertising. That's one of the biggest models on the internet. And I think in this next phase of the internet, regardless of if AI is involved, regardless of whatever happens, we as the audiences need to figure out how to harness the attention that we generate And you're seeing a lot of this happen in like the podcast space and some of the independent media and some circles. But I think there's so much more that we can do to like realign how we organize ourselves and also how we work as units digitally to, again, realign some of the incentives that power the internet. And I think that's going to be a big part of whatever comes next. So like the tooling is going to be one thing, but the collaborations and the community layer and the real human interactions and like these real world networks of people leveraging their powers in digital channels is going to be the next layer of how we like exert force, right? You can call it influence, you can call it power, you can call it whatever you want, but like there's an experiment to be had at scale there with really smart folks coming together and like figuring out how to realign some of that. So whether that's on YouTube or X or across all of our websites with like these little syndication tools, like there's all sorts of ways I think we could start harnessing this thing way bigger than any tool and make something that, again, because it has this human connection layer, is more powerful than any piece of software we could build. So that's a little bit of, you know, foresight and shining into like some of my thinking about where I think this could go. Yeah, we'll leave it at that, I think.
Awesome. Great chat, everybody. Nice to meet y'all, and see you on the next one.
Bye, everyone. Thanks again for your time. Appreciate everyone. And yeah, talk soon.